And welcome back to a brand new episode of Tribal Council Chat. As always, we are your hosts. My name is Bruce Heller,
My name's Quick Cornell.
and let's get started. So, we have a really fun episode for you guys today. It's one that we've been teasing doing probably since we started the show. But before we get started, me and Brett made a little bit of a challenge because in the NFL playoffs, my my team, the Kansas City Chiefs, was playing against his team. I thought you were a Colts fan, but you wanted to make this bet
I'm a
because we were
Colts
playing the
fan, but
Bills.
living near the border, I also kind of cheer for Buffalo because they're the closest team to me.
That's fair. And our bet was
Buffalo's the one team that from Ottawa we could drive to in just a few hours.
nice. So our bet was that the win the the person whose team won would get to ask the other person five Survivor trivia questions. And so we're gonna do our little challenge before we get into the episode. And the way I've ordered these is I feel like they're going to get a little bit more difficult each time. We'll see if that actually happens or not. Maybe it'll be completely backwards. But let's dive in with the first question. So, as I've said on the show numerous times, my favorite season is Survivor China. So, who was the merge boot that season?
Merge boot that season would be Jean Robert.
No, it was Jamie.
Oh,
Wow. Okay. That one I had off the top of my head. This next one was one that I thought of the question and had to look up to make sure I had the right answer in my head, and I did, but I required assistance. Who was the first zero vote finalist?
first zero vote finalist. I'm gonna go through seasons at a time. One vote. Twilight gonna vote. Becky.
Correct. Becky Lee from Survivor Cook Islands. Okay, so we're already wrong
Well,
on me trying to have this be harder each time.
so it's interesting there too because it's the first time they do a final three, something we've been kind of stuck with zero vote finalists in the more modern era.
Yeah,
Maybe we've could have seen a sign of way back then, and it never came across because it was mixed back then between what was a final two and say a micro versus a final or in other seasons, and then we kind of leaned into threes.
yeah. And so your third question, this is another one that I had off the top of my head for some reason because I have weird knowledge in my head when it comes to this show. Boston Rob has played Survivor five different times, each time in a different location. Name the five locations that Rob played in.
More cases.
Marquesas was one.
Huh?
Panama. Yep.
Samoa,
Yep.
Nicaragua,
Yep.
and the Mammoth Islands in Fiji.
Correct. Yeah, I figured that one would be kind of easy also. And so the next one is this is one I thought of, and it's kind of going to sound weird, but you'll probably understand what I mean. There have been two different stretches where three different seasons in a row were won by women. Name the seasons and the winners for both of those stretches.
How many seasons in a row?
Three. So there's two different sets of three.
Um, let's think of this. Sandra Amber
Yep, Jenna, Sandra, Amber
is going to
with
be one, and then that
Amazon, Pearl
ended
Islands, and
when
All
Chris
Stars.
won, and then the next one would be 23 was oh, Sophie, Kim, Denise.
Yep, Sophie Kim Denise with South Pacific, One World, and Philippines. Nice. It's a weirdly worded question, but I figured you would get it. And so this last one is not my own brain. This is a fun fact I saw digging through Twitter because I couldn't think of a last question. What is the only calendar year in which three sole survivors were crowned?
Which three sole survivors were crowned? Um, that's a great question. When did we do? I think what could have affected some dates. I'm gonna say that this has to do with moving the schedule after the tragic events of 9/11, and it's 2002.
It was 2002, actually. I would have never known that off the top of my head, but that was a fun fact posted at some point recently by former guest on this show, Steven, who runs Survivor Quotes. That was just a fun fact he had posted.
Nice.
So,
I think that must have to be it because I know with Marquesas was supposed to be filmed in Jordan, and then 9/11 happened, so that got canceled, and then they moved both to the Marquesas Islands, but also chartered a cruise ship to hold the crew and get there because apparently it's like the hardest place in the world to get to that they've ever filmed in.
yeah. And I've also heard, think I heard or read somewhere that the bugs were also really awful that season compared to other seasons.
That they've ever been.
And so you were right. The year was 2002. The seasons were 3, 4, and 5. So you did really good. You got 4 out of 5. And surprisingly, the one I was intending to be the easy one was the one you didn't get, with Jamie being the China merge boot. But you were close. I'm pretty sure Jean Robert was either right after that or 2 votes after that.
Yeah.
So diving into our actual episode now, it's one we've been teasing and saying we need to do since we started the show back in May of last year. And that is the Gabon episode that we're finally doing.
Getting around to this. Been one that we've wanted to do for a while. Probably one of the gameplay wise worst seasons, but at the same time, character wise, one of the best, going right from the beginning of the cast to the end.
Yeah, I like to describe this season in my both in my head and just in Facebook posts and online as kind of this beautiful train wreck. 'Cause the beautiful part is, like you said, the cast and the characters are great. You've got all sorts of fun, weird, wild storylines that just make you scratch your head and laugh. But the train wreck part is that the gameplay is just awful. And it's like Bob seems like a likable guy as the winner, but like even your winner's gameplay isn't super strong. But just everything other than the gameplay is just so wild and wacky that you can't help but just kind of like this season in a weird way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely one that you could say has a cult following within the fan base.
Yeah, it does. Certain seasons and winners are like that. And so we've planned this episode. We have it divided into 3 sections, which are casting characters, storylines, and just things that happen, and then the gameplay itself. So diving in with the cast, who do you want to start with?
I know there's some big names coming up. We can leave that for after. I want to start right at the beginning and go back to Michelle.
I
I
actually
mean,
liked her.
she was sick, so I understand it. But when I watched that first challenge, when the season opens up, and by the way, it's one of the first, like when they do an opening challenge in Survivor right off the bat, it's one of the best ones they've ever done.
Oh yeah.
And when I watched that challenge, I'm like, how did Michelle get voted out first when she was the first girl up that mountain and Gillian was God knows where?
No idea. It's like I said, that kind of goes into the gameplay of this
Recovered from
season.
minor viral infections in Survivor all the time. I think she could have been very useful to that tribe moving forward. as opposed to being voted out, where Fong essentially just becomes a complete train wreck.
Yeah, and when I watched the season, I knew who had won. I knew who one of the I knew Sugar had made the end because of Corinne's jury speech is so famous. But that's pretty much all I knew, and I found myself rooting for Michelle Chase to not go home first because it didn't make any sense to me. But she was a fun character. She would have been so much fun to see more of.
Really funny interaction too between her and Kenny.
Well, yeah, that's just Kenny. Him and Crystal kind of have their own little duo there. And speaking of, let's move into Kenny next. Like, he's a fun character. What were your thoughts on him?
Right back to the beginning, like that interaction he has with Michelle eating termites is really funny. Just having the archetype and the cast member being a professional video game player for the first time ever really was a difference in maybe very old school Survivor casting versus what we now call old school, but was pretty new at the time. And really diversifying the cast and diversifying the backgrounds and the what they do for a living and seeing what new types of people would react in the show.
Yeah.
Like you say, Kenny had a duo with Crystal. I'm not sure why. Crystal would be one of the last people I would think that you would want to have a duo with on Survivor, but
Yeah. The thing that entertains me about Kenny is like you never have to wonder what Kenny's saying because he just kind of has this dry sense of humor slash honesty about him that he's just gonna tell you what he thinks, which was makes for good TV. Like he's not the best game player necessarily, but he was entertaining. Him and Crystal were an entertaining pair.
yeah, agreed. Well, we might have moved down quickly because Kenny came up, but let's just hop back for a little bit to the pre-merge because I think some of those players, especially in a character-driven season, need to be covered in here because
Yeah.
there were some great, even though the season kind of is odd the whole way through, there are some great characters that go home pretty early. They might have only lasted 1 week, like one episode, like what I commented about Michelle. But now I want to comment on another player who goes, I think I already brought her up, but who goes home in the first episode. Gillian finding elephant poop to start a fire is a great definition of how this season is going to go.
Oh, I forgot about that. That was an amazing scene. Jillian's a fun character. She seems really nice. Like I was rooting for her to go home first just because I didn't want Michelle to. But like I kind of wish I could have had both of them longer because if they had both stuck around a while, I feel like they both would have been such interesting characters. And
Just 1 minute. I just want to quickly check something. I think I found interesting. Yeah, there I go. Exactly what I was thinking of based off of her speak confessionals in the game and her accent. It was really interesting with Gillian too to see her playing the game in Gabon as someone who was born in Africa and moved to the United States.
yeah, that was really cool to get to see. And you see
Gillian came
that
from
sometimes.
for the audience who's unaware, Gillian was born in Johannesburg and then moved to California.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a season I make fun of because it's easy sometimes, but at times it's not as awful as it's made out to be. It reminds me of Survivor Thailand in that Sheehan talks about coming back to the continent of Asia, where her family heritage lines back to, and that's kind of what Jill.
PG as well at the Great Wall.
That's true. I forgot about that PG moment.
Thai
That
talking about being a Vietnamese refugee, where Ko Long is like a 2 hour drive and ferry ride away from his home country.
who Ty?
Yeah.
Yeah, another great Survivor duo, Ty and his chicken, that made it all the way to final tribal council without being eaten. So good for him.
Oh god, that's funny.
Yeah, and
Oh
so
man. I guess there's another pre-merger that there's a couple more pre-mergers that we have to go into, but the next one, when I look at the boot list, tell me if I missed anybody. But maybe I should just throw it over to you because from what I hear, he's missing.
Sorry, I'm pulling up the season's Wikipedia page right now so I can look at the boot list. I meant to have this open. I'm looking at pre-mergers.
Yeah. I'm saying
Oh, yeah,
a missing
okay.
player. GC.
You've got Ace, by the way, who's a pre-merger.
We're coming to.
Oh, we're coming. Is that not who you meant? Oh,
Is
GC
my
was
mic
pre-merge. Yeah,
is
so
my mic not working?
it's just I didn't hear it. I was
Okay.
trying to find the Wikipedia page.
I was
So
screaming GC into the mic.
yeah, so and we'll talk
How
about
does a guy
him.
get lost right before a challenge? Is what
Yeah, I didn't mention him yet because I figure we would talk about him during the like storylines and moments
come back to it. But
section. But yeah, him somehow being elected leader of the tribe, which never really works well, by the way.
I mean, when you think of people that have been elected leader, one of them has won, and his name is Richard Hatch.
Yeah,
Other than that, it's GC, Mick, Jolanda,
Aaron.
and
Yeah.
that's never a good place to be.
But of all people, the guy that gets elected leader of the tribe that should probably be more on top of things than normal, and to be fair, he didn't want that role at all, goes missing right before they need to leave for a challenge, and nobody can find him. Nobody knows where he's at. Like, that's great.
Guessing from what we've heard from some players that talk about things behind the scenes, this is probably the moment in time when production starts telling them how far away they are allowed from camp.
Yeah.
When we look at a season, like I know in our locations episode, you brought up Australia. You see scenes in that where like Keith or Tina is out climbing a mountain off to themselves, just acknowledging the fact that they're living in the middle of the outback and no one cares.
Yeah. And we see I don't like to bring this person up, but this moment fits too well in with what you're saying. We see someone cross the water into those woods and go forever trying to hunt a pig with a makeshift spear knife on the end of a stick. So,
And then we also see somebody cross the water that I actually love and wish we got a chance to see again, but that's Cowboy discovering the other tribe.
oh gosh, that was funny. Yeah, because see, with Guatemala, we saw the pre-merge tribes like come together for the birthday celebration, but that one was on purpose. This Cook Island crew, led by Cowboy, who's just hilarious, just accidentally stumbled into the other tribe's camp. It's so funny.
Yeah.
But
Anyway, did you want to go down to Ace and we'll talk about GC during a gameplay moment?
yeah, we talked about GC a little bit here. Him being elected leader and just having no making it very clear he has no interest in this at all, making kind of no effort to get along with those around him. It's just he's a fun character that I feel like most of us would get kind of annoyed with if we were out there in the jungle relying on each other to survive. But yeah. So before we get to the people that made the merge and the big names that went deep into it, I did want to mention Ace because there's no really like big moments or iconic storylines or moments with Ace that come to my mind, but he's just between the accent and he just and the whole package, he just comes
This
off as
was
like
the
this kooky movie villain, Bond villain character to me that is
this was like the pre-merge low budget version of Coach.
yes, him and so that means Vince on Worlds Apart is what, like the Wish.com version of Coach?
Oh, Joe, but
Yeah,
I kind of saw the two of them and I'm like, this is the same guy. For a
I
while,
feel
I
more
thought
like
that Joe was a coconut vendor.
Joe is the knockoff version of Ozzy though, because he at least beasts out in challenges.
Good point.
But yeah, Ace is amazing. He just comes off as like this kooky Bond villain that is again not great at the game, but really fun to watch. And he kind of gets under some people's skins, and which is why he gets voted out pre-merge. But Ace is so much fun, so
People's
kooky.
skins, I mean, Sugar's ballot paper tells the whole story.
Yeah, it does. And so, yeah, I just before we move on to the big names, wanted to mention Ace.
Voting for Ace is probably one of the funniest things that you'll see in a voting confessional of all time.
And we've got a few of those voting confessionals this season because we've got Corinne voting for Randy. Not Corinne, Crystal voting for Randy.
Yeah.
And you've got, and I'll talk about some of these in
I was
storylines.
gonna say we won't go into it too much because sometime I want to do a like voting confessionals countdown.
Yeah. And just before we move on, because we're talking about it, another one of my favorites from this season, other than Crystal's, which we'll talk about when we talk about Crystal, Randy vote, and I forget who it was. Randy voting for someone and saying this isn't business. This is strictly personal. Especially after I finished watching All Stars a couple weeks ago, where Lex tells two or three people this isn't personal. This is business. Randy doing the exact opposite of that is hilarious. And so, moving on to the merge.
Randy doing exactly what Lex should have been thinking at final, but
Well, yeah, he just said what Lex was trying to disguise at Final Tribal.
so
And so,
moving on to
moving on
players
to
who
the
made the
merge,
merge.
since we just
Before
talked
we get,
about him, let's get into Randy.
can we just jump up first for a few seconds?
Okay.
Before we get into those, the first two big names that I want to bring up for sure, the Charlie and Marcus friendship we have to bring up here. That was great.
Yeah, that was fun. Very fun
I
to
mean, you
watch.
have what Charlie was in the LGBT community, and I think Marcus was not. Yet they were tied that way.
Yeah. Those, yeah.
Alliance there that maybe never worked so much because of who had the power in the game, but probably could have went very far. They would have been two kind of like odd selections that maybe you don't think of, but that I would have liked to see play again.
True. I wouldn't hate that. I don't know if they'd
Yeah.
be my top choices, but because honestly, I do kind of want to see Michelle Chase play again. But yeah, they'd be fun. And so, getting into,
Down. Audience, if you have a bias in this season, if you don't like our next two players, sorry you're about to hate me and probably never listen again. But this is why I love this season. Randy Bailey and Corinne Kaplan.
yeah, so uh, I'm don't hate Corinne. I don't like her on this season. Her second season, she grows on me a little bit. She's not like it feels toned down a little bit. Her second season. Randy, I'm just not a fan of for whatever reason. But I'm looking at Wikipedia here, and it says he's from Missouri, so that's cool. I like him a little bit more
Yes.
now.
Frankly, to me, it's just like, and maybe I have a similar background to Randy in that way outside of the game, but like the idea of a wedding photographer who never wants to be married, I love that storyline.
Uh-huh. Me too. And when you think of like wedding photographers or planners or people that work with weddings, you kind of think of people that are just kind of bubbly and sunshiny. And
And
Randy's just
Randy
a
is anything but that.
Randy's just a human rain cloud for 3/4 of the season. And To the point where you have Crystal, who we'll get to, literally screaming so loud you can hear her voting confessional from tribal seats. Forget you, go home, goodbye. Like, it's just so funny that that guy works with weddings. When you think of people in that field as being so happy and bubbly and sunshiny, and he's just a grumpy rain cloud for most of the season. So funny.
Yeah, he's hilarious. I love getting this that we got to see him as a villain too.
Yeah. And was he named an episode in Heroes versus Villains too? Wasn't he the one that said that girl is like a virus talking about Parv?
Yeah.
And he wasn't necessarily wrong because, I mean,
No, not at all.
once she got with Russell, the two of them kind of got a foothold thanks to Tyson. Tyson,
Absolutely.
Rob had a perfect plan to take Russell out, and Tyson changed his vote at the last second without talking to anyone. Got himself
Yep,
voted out and gave Russell and Parvati the power.
he did.
And so,
And then moving on from Randy, any thoughts of Corinne that you want to mention?
so I
I'm
don't.
sure there'll be a certain moment that we'll get into in gameplay that's going to pretty much define her season. But
I feel like what not only like people remember about her this season, but her across both of her seasons, is her jury speech, which is just hard for me to watch.
Julie's speech, yes, is one of the hardest moments to watch in the whole franchise.
And
That being said, I just wanted to comment on her first confessional, and it's why I do really like her as a character, even in this season. Is it's fun to just be able to watch somebody who wants to come out and make great TV and not care at all.
yeah,
Like in
and
Corinne's case, so many times, what do we see, especially in the more modern era where they're casting so many super fans, is that everyone's first impression on the show is totally the same. I've been trying this for so long. I'm finally here. This is the best thing I've ever done. It's going to be the best moment of my life. And and that's all fine. And you can tell all of these people want to actually enjoy the experience and enjoy playing with each other, even if they have to each other out. Lynn, on the other hand, introduced herself up to us as the audience by saying, "I'm gonna laugh when people cry, be a total explicitive, and I'm gonna own it." And that's such a different approach that makes her one of the all-time great characters of the game.
yeah, and I like a good villain. I like that archetype. I think part of what holds me back from being the Corinne fan you are is the final jury speech, which when we did our jury speeches episode, Steven said that like people went in planning to vote for Rich, and Sue Hawks was so rough, people changed their vote to vote for Kelly. Corinne's is even harder for me to watch than Sue's, but
Yeah.
also just I don't know. I feel like we have scenes with Corinne where it feels like she's trying to be the villain and trying to put on this persona that it
Even
almost
thinking
feels
of
like she's trying
myself,
too hard sometimes.
there's been a couple of moments that I can point to that, like when I was a student politician, that I may have said something that after I'll go and apologize for and say, hey, that went really too low and was my bad.
Yeah.
With Corinne, she still won't get to that point.
No. Yeah. And a lot of it is just that's who she is, and a lot of it feels genuine. But there's, like I said, there's just scenes to me, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'll know when I see it. It just feels like she's trying to put on this persona and almost trying too hard to be the villain. And but the scenes where it is just genuinely her are funny. I enjoy it. Just the whole package. I don't hate. I just don't love as much as you do.
So where do you want to go next? We're
So
getting late to close to the end
so
of not the end of the show, of course, but the end of this segment.
yeah, the next boot after Corinne is Crystal. So I mean, I'm not the biggest Crystal fan, but Her confessional voting out Randy is funny.
Agree. I wasn't a huge fan. Um, the whole season, I think my number one thought was, how can you go to the Olympics and be this bad at physical challenges?
Yeah.
Only to then realize that she got her Olympic medal taken away. So I'm like, this might explain.
Well, yeah. That's a whole nother story that I just learned about recently.
Oh,
But
really?
I don't know how I missed that, but yeah. So Crystal, not really a ton stands out compared to us just talking about Randy and Corinne, but at the same time, a big enough character on the season that we can't really gloss over and not mention either.
She was a good character. And definitely someone who added a lot and might have not been in that majority, but certainly at all points, but made herself definitely well known and had a big impact on the season.
So moving down, and we talked about Kenny already. We've got our fourth placer and fourth place finisher Matty. He was a fun boot. He was,
Typical challenge beast that goes home right before the final travel council.
and we'll talk about him in stories and moments section because him at the auction, there's a funny moment. And finally, moving to our final three. Third place finisher Sugar, second place Susie, first place Bob. What are your thoughts on our final three here?
I'll just start with Sugar. I was surprised to see her come third. And if I look at the voting history, yeah, didn't even get one vote. That surprised me. I thought Sugar would have at least got something, maybe picked up a vote after, like you say about Kelly and Rich, after what happened with Corinne.
Yeah.
Um, Finding the idol was great. Her after she has it, being in the Sugar Shack and just enjoying time on Exile, that was fun.
Yeah. Sugar was probably my favorite character of the season. Just, and we'll talk about the Sugar Shack next. So I won't get too deep into that. What's interesting to me is,
Opposite with kind of the complete opposite with Susie. As Sugar, I expected Bob to win. I'm surprised that Susie came so close to winning the game.
I was just about to say that because we see so many scenes of people either not liking Susie or complaining that she doesn't do much or wanting her gone for whatever reason. That it just seems like not a lot of people like her, but she gets 3 jury votes to win this game from Crystal, Ken, and Maddie. So,
With that criticism of Susie, about 2/3 of it comes from Corinne.
and the other third probably comes from Randy. But
Yeah.
production made a point to show us all of that criticism. So the
Yeah,
fact that Susie got 3 jury votes was surprising to me.
agreed. And then, as far as Bob goes, how I want to put this is essentially on a season full of wacky characters, the nice guy that everybody loves ends up with the money.
Yeah, he's on a season with where everyone else is kind of bickering and arguing and everyone has something they don't like. Bob's kind of the sensible one. Kind of, he just doesn't stand out much both on his season and among winners. There's just so many big names that have won, and this
I
season is
almost
full of
think
wacky
that like
characters.
Bob.
You kind of forget about Bob, but he's really likable on this season. I like him, and of course he wins, so he did something right.
I've always kind of said that like Bob had to win this season because if Bob goes on another season, I don't think he wins. I don't
No,
think he comes close to winning. But on this season, he was able to just play that role of I helped the tribe out and I'm knowledgeable of the outdoors because for people who don't know, he is a science teacher. And I'm just living this amazing experience and getting to know everyone. And he pulled it off because there was so much animosity with literally everybody else on the cast.
and Bob's the nice guy that will give Randy a fake idol, but when people laugh at Randy for for playing the fake idol will scold them afterwards and tell them he didn't like that they laughed at somebody. So even in giving someone a fake idol, he simultaneously finds a way to jury manage that same person because he kind of defended Randy right afterwards after Tribal.
Yeah.
So moving into the story section, because we just mentioned it and it's kind of a major thing throughout the season, let's start with the Sugar Shack. And for those of you that may have not seen the season, this story is Exile Island this season has two options. You can either choose one option, which is comfort, and you have this hammock and food in this little hut with shade, or you can get the idol clue. And the first time they get the chance, they send Sugar to Exile, and she picks the clue and finds the idol. And they keep sending her back almost every episode. So she keeps choosing the comfort and the food that no one else is getting. But she's getting every episode because for some reason they keep sending the same person to Exile, even though it makes no sense. You're basically giving that person an idol, even if they're terrible at looking.
They do a lot of things that don't make much sense.
Well, yeah. But yeah,
It was a great setup of how they actually did the idol this season, because it does have that opportunity to just see if they are going to send the same person, them enjoying themselves, but at the same time, it's also an interesting comparison because let's say they play it very differently and they send different people every week. Then it becomes the question of, do I think that somebody else already found the idol? Because if the answer is no, if you, let's say you turn down the quote Sugar Shack or whatever the production called it before she gave it that name, you you have to kind of ask yourself, am I suffering for an idol that is not here?
yeah. And so who knows if they had sent other people more often, what choices they would have made. But good for Sugar. She keeps getting sent to Exile, and she was getting food and comfort that the rest of the tribe wasn't getting. So the other thing I had written down for this section was GC disappearing right before a challenge, but we talked about that already. So what do you want to get to next in this section?
Maybe on the note of GC, just go back to something earlier because I know we just talked about locations a couple weeks ago, but the wildlife in this season is just amazing.
Oh yeah, that's another note I had is the whole tribe seeing an elephant right across the water,
Yeah,
and we get to see them watching it in awe as we are also in awe. Just such a cool scene of just
one
them
of the
having an
best
elephant right by camp.
sets that they've done,
Yeah.
and then like them building the like African huts for the tribes to be in at their camp. Well, that was cool too.
Oh, so cool. And so because we mentioned it in the characters and the cast, I just want to mention it here as a storyline. Other than Bob, there is just so much animosity and annoyance and just random grudges across this season.
Yeah. Like, and that can be summed up in watching the like slingshot golf challenge between Randy and Matty.
Oh yeah. And it comes out in the auction too.
On an island, they don't have that much space as they did in Africa, but that was one fun challenge.
And the Randy and Maddie thing comes back in the challenge because Randy buys a plate of cookies that he can disperse throughout the tribe how he wants to. And he gives everyone one, but doesn't give Maddie one. And then he offers his own to Sugar, and he sacrifices that for himself. And Sugar turns around and gives it to Maddie. And Maddie gets himself one, even though Randy didn't want him to have one. And Randy, who bought the tray of cookies, gets nothing, which is just hilarious.
That was funny. What a great auction overall. Um, and yeah, just seeing this whole interaction over a chocolate chip cookie, it's like, come on, guys, it's a damn chocolate chip cookie. It's not that hard to just have everybody eat a cookie.
Yeah, well, it is when Randy's involved, and he doesn't want Matty to have one. But so much of these little storylines seem to center around Randy because you've got, like I mentioned earlier, you've got Crystal voting for Randy. You've made my life miserable. Forget you, go home, goodbye. So passionate about it that she's saying it loud enough that they can hear it all the way at the seats that aren't close to the voting booth. Just so funny. And you've got
I
Randy,
wonder if Caleb was thinking of that voting confessional this season.
maybe. And
He
yeah, and
certainly
like I
did the
mentioned,
same
you've
thing.
got him voting. This isn't business. This is strictly personal. And so people didn't like Randy, but he certainly had people he didn't like also. There's just so much animosity across this season for no reason. And it's these grudges seem to always be over like the smallest little thing.
Always.
Like, what are you guys doing? I know you're starving and not eating, and mentally that's exhausting, but come on, it's a cookie. Why are we making this big of a deal out of it? And so, what else did you want to get to in the
We
storylines?
covered the auction just there. We covered final, I guess. Fake idols was one thing that we had on our list.
Yeah, so I guess we will move into gameplay. Bob didn't do a ton strategic other than just be the guy people like amongst all the craziness. But he did make some really good fake idols and gave one of them to Randy when Randy was about to go
Worked
home.
perfectly in this season when we had that merge feast incident with the idol being thrown into the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, I forgot about that. Oh, that was funny.
The two of them perfectly kind of tied together in terms of there's this overwhelming question: did anybody manage to like snatch the idol before we chucked it into the ocean?
Yeah. And Bob
And
makes
for all we know, it's still down there someday, right now.
yeah. And Bob makes a really great fake that
He
he
does.
gives to Randy and gives Randy a sense of security right before he goes home.
Yeah.
And he ends up getting Randy's jury vote anyway. So, like I said, Bob's gameplay is really simple. Make a couple fake idols and be the likable guy and the helpful guy amongst the crazy of this fever dream of a cast and season.
And in a season without a ton of, say, like strategic gameplay, that's all he needed to do.
Yeah, for sure. And so I know you wanted to talk about Final Tribal a little bit more. What do you have there?
I guess we already kind of covered it in the character moments. I think it made sense that we went through it early because this is such a like character heavy season that we spent most of our time on that segment. But I really just went with like, even as someone that is a Corinne fan, yes, that speech is next to impossible to get through.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was also just with the result, like I said, surprised that Sugar did so poorly and Susie did so well. I thought Bob would win it, but I thought it might be like a 5-1-1 or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Not something where if one from Bob flips to Susie, all of the sudden Susie's the winner of this season.
Yeah. Which would have just been insane to think about, considering, like I said, most of the Susie content we get is people complaining about her. So, but while we're on the under the umbrella of gameplay for the season, I just want to make a note at how little of people's gameplay this season makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, Fong votes out Michelle Chase first, who the young, strong, good at challenges, did really well in the first reward challenge, and decides to keep Gillian, who's likable, yes, but also older and struggles and challenges, and because of that, you went right back to tribal. And then Sugar getting sent to exile over and over again to the point where, like, even if she stinks at finding things and is super unobservant, you're giving her an idol by sending her that many times.
Yeah.
Just and there's more that I'm forgetting, but so much of the gameplay this season just is terrible and doesn't make any sense, and it's so funny to watch. Just because this season feels like a fever dream as you're watching it,
It does.
and so before we move on to a line blindside first boot, did you have anything else?
Not really. I think we covered about everything. We did spend more of our time talking about the cast, but I think that's expected in this season. So
Yeah, and we had it set out to be three different sections, and they all kind of blended together because it is so character driven. You can't really do a cast breakdown without talking about the wacky character of it and the moments they had. But it was a great discussion. And so moving in to a Lion Blindside first boot, what three names do you have?
so the three names I'm going to give you based off of this winner being Bob is a combination of students and teachers.
Interesting.
So that I will give you the names from Survivor Borneo, Gretchen Cody,
Okay.
from Survivor Panama, Bruce Kegel,
Ooh.
and fun fact, if any of you don't know this, even though she was not a student while she was on the game, one of Bob's former students, Julie Berry.
Oh. So I messaged with Julie a little bit before we started the show when I used to have a fan page on Instagram. So nice, so easy to talk to. Fun on the season. Has a really funny scene there on the beach. But so I'm gonna align with Julie and see. I really like both of the other two. Gretchen seems like she would have been a really strong player had Pagon got the merge, so I'll keep her around long enough to blindside her just because I feel like blindsiding a strong player like that'll help my resume. And then I'll first boot Bruce. But even on Panama, Bruce seems like he'd be really a cool guy to hang out with on the island. Easy to
I think
talk to.
I'm gonna I think I'm gonna flip it for mine. I'm with you on aligning with Julie. I think I'll blindside Bruce for that reason. I think he'd be great to work within an alliance. Everything I hear from the Borneo cast is that Gretchen was going to be our first winner if Pagong had the uh, strategy together, was looking for the right word.
Yeah,
And if they form the final five instead of Kagi, she would have probably been the winner, so therefore I'm going to use that logic in first booter.
nice. So I'm going to take three names from Gabon from the season that we're doing the episode on. You have our first boot that we talked about more than we'll probably talk about most first boots. You have Michelle Chase. You have, sorry, let me scroll back up. You have Paloma Soto Castillo, who just doesn't get talked about, and we didn't mention it all either, so I'll throw that wrench in there. And you have Ace, our resident Bond villain.
All three pre-mergers. That's an interesting one. Um, I'm gonna align with Michelle. I think if she doesn't get sick, she would do much better in the game. That's just bad luck. Um, Ace would probably drive anybody crazy in one day. I don't. I'm not sure with this tribe whether he's actually from, like, I know he's born in New York, but whether he's actually British or if that was all an act. But if he has any ties to West London, I mean, he's gonna hate me as a Liverpool fan anyway.
True.
So first boot Ace, and that leaves Paloma, who was kind of that like odd pick in your list that I think most people forgot about. That I'll just put her as blindside in the middle.
Yeah, that was me just wanting to throw a wrench in there that was a player that doesn't get talked about and most people won't remember, but I've got the season's Wikipedia page in front of me. So I think I agree with your picks. I'll align with Michelle because, like you said, she could have gone farther if she had, even without taking away the sickness. Look at Token Chains, for example. One of my very favorites that season is Sierra Reed, who gets voted out in air quotes at the first impressions because she had been sick right before the Maroonie. They give her a chance to stay in, and she goes pretty far, and even outlast Tyson, who had been treating her not very well for a couple days. So that was very satisfying. Michelle might have been able to have a similar arc if they had given her a chance. So I'll align with her. And then, yeah, I just don't know about Ace. That's too much of a wild card to me. So I'll first boot him and blindside Paloma, who admittedly even I had forgotten about. So yeah, yeah,
Really
this is a
enjoyed
fun
doing that
episode,
season recap that we've been talking about for about 9 months now.
and it was just as wild and kooky of an episode as we expected it to be. Not as
Anyway,
kooky as
we'll
the
have
season,
a
though.
yeah. Grab your torches and head back to camp.
Subscribe on YouTube, like and comment, follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Bye, guys. Have a great week.